Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Gerard, and I am a board member of the Medfield Coalition for Public Education. It is our pleasure to welcome you this evening to this event. For over 25 years, our mission has been to fund creative initiatives with the sole goal of better educating our children in Medfield, regardless of the district's budget. We support academic excellence and enrichment of our students' learning experiences. We strongly believe in extending learning opportunities to our community through offering a lecture like the one we have tonight. We are pleased to have partnered with Needham Bank for this event. They too believe in maintaining a relationship with the community and thus enthusiastically sponsored Christopher Wilson's presentation. Needham Bank has been a longtime contributor to our organization, and recently, in addition to being a high honor sponsor, they offered us a challenge grant. And the challenge is this: each time a checking account is opened with Needham Bank and Medfield Coalition for Public Education, or MCP for short, is mentioned, Needham Bank contributes an additional $100 to our organization. It is a generous offer that we hope each of you will consider when you make a decision about where you would like to bank. At this time, I would like to welcome to the stage Eric Morse, who is the Senior Vice President at Needham Bank, to say a few words and introduce our speaker, Christopher Wilson.
Pleasure to be here. I have some breaking news. First of all, warm regards from our CEO and Medfield resident, Jack McGeorge, who would be here this evening. He's having his knee scoped. Fabulous athlete, even at his advanced age. And that's why he's not here with us this evening. But the breaking news is that the hometown weeklies and Wicked Local Media both do a survey every year where you can vote on the best salon in town and the best pizza in town and, oddly enough, the best bank in town. And I'm delighted to tell you that, oddly enough, we won as the best bank in Medfield, something we're really very proud of. And so for those of you who voted for us, thank you. And for those among us this evening who are our customers, we thank you so much for your patronage. A word about the author, if I may. Christopher Wilson, a lifelong Boston resident, began his career as a liberal arts grad answering phones for Fidelity, slightly larger than our bank, in 1980. Over the next 30 years, he navigated the mutual fund business here in Boston, ending up as the president and CEO of Columbia Funds. That was the mutual fund complex for Bank of America. His journey and the coaching of thousands of people along the way led him to write a book showing what skills are needed for career success. The book, BA to Boardroom with No BS, Skills for Life, tells stories about his career that illustrate how to acquire and use over 40 different skills to make yourself more successful. Examples such as having a better interview, building high-performing teams, and influencing outcomes in a boardroom. The book is a perfect gift for a college student. I have 3 girls, thankfully I just paid my last tuition bill, who have graduated from college. Each of them read the book. I can highly recommend it. It's also a perfect gift for anyone re-entering the workforce, a manager or a leader seeking new tools to increase their effectiveness. The style is very direct, much like Chris, engaging and written with no-nonsense business language. Without further ado, our valued depositor and our speaker tonight, Chris Wilson.
Good evening, and thank you for coming out. Thank you, Eric, and the #1 Needham Bank for sponsoring this, along with Medfield Coalition, Catherine, and others. I know you've worked hard on this. And I appreciate the seniors that are in the room for coming out. I know it's AP week for everybody, and for some people that means advanced placement, for others it means another party. But wherever you are in that range, thank you for taking time. And thank you to the parents for coming out, for your support. Parents, I'm a parent of 2 wonderful daughters. My oldest worked in DC for 4 years and snuck in tonight. I didn't know that, but you know, wherever you are, love you dearly, kid. And by the way, you're helping me at the book table later. But thank you, parents, for coming out. Showing support takes many different forms for your kids, but one of them is trying to find ways to help them be successful. And so hopefully tonight I'll be able to give you some things to think about and some ideas and to take away, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end. But I've watched the media write a lot about how graduates can't find jobs after school or how colleges aren't preparing graduates adequately. And while the media loves to pontificate on things, that's not 100% true. And what I want to do is give you a little different perspective and hopefully give you some more optimism on there are things you can do to be more successful. And that isn't, well, maybe a trend, it isn't a pervasive trend if you really pay attention to what you can do in the workforce. So as I started to look at the last 30 years I've worked, and as Eric said, I'll review with you in a minute, I started in an entry-level job and ended up being a CEO, working my way through many areas. What I noticed was that knowledge became less and less important. And it isn't that you don't have to have it, but it's that knowledge is less of an advantage in the workplace today. If I wanted to go out and find how to do surgery, within 2 hours I could tell you how to do a surgical procedure, what sort of side effects it had, what medication you needed, where the nearest hospital is that was good at it, who the best doctor is, what hotel you need to stay at, and where you get the best dinner. I mean, you can find knowledge so quickly that it doesn't make it unimportant, but it makes it less of a competitive advantage when you're in life or in the workforce. So what is a competitive advantage? Well, skills. And so I started to think more about it, and that's what led to writing the book. I had a lot of my daughter's friends, as well as a lot of people I've mentored over the years, say, gee, you've got all these ideas, you should put them down in a book. So what I've done is make the case that skills are very important, number one, but number two, they're learnable by anybody. You don't have to be tops in your class, you don't have to be a top athlete. It doesn't, academic standing or accomplishment in other areas doesn't have anything to do with your ability to get better at skills and have an advantage going out into your adult life and the workforce. It's not just work, it's also in relationships and in the way you build friendships. But those skills are just as important, if not more important, than knowledge you take out into the workplace. So the premise of the book is, while knowledge is the mastery of fact, skill is the mastery of behavior. So what I want to go through with you tonight is how do you start to look at that and really embrace it and build on it. So I want to go through 4 things tonight. It's going to take about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then I'm going to open up for questions. I want to go back to the 1970s and give you a little background for all the students in here, show you how early on, when I was your age, you can start actually building skills. I didn't know about it at the time, but I did start doing things that led to that. So we'll take a little bit of a Wayback Machine, and it's not to tell you that I walked 5 miles to school and you're not working that hard. It's to show you that even though things were very different, skills are timeless. They don't have an expiration date. They applied a century ago, they applied decades ago, they applied then, they apply now. And so I want to show you a little bit about how that works. Second, I want to look at the generation that's coming out of schools right now. There's some very unique characteristics and some things that make this generation very different, and I think make this generation extremely powerful, potentially, depending on what they choose to do with what they've got. Third, I want to look at some trends in history, and not retrospectively, today, trends that are taking place today that are going to impact decisions that you make, but you need to be aware of to make good decisions. And finally, I'll touch on some of the skills that are covered in the book. There are over 40 skills, and they range from personal skills to management skills to leadership skills and even life skills. You know, how do you open a good bank account? Would need a bank, obviously, but you know, credit cards and insurance and just some things that don't necessarily get covered a lot. At least for my kids, they weren't. We actually had our own little class we did, but I just put down some things on that. So again, about 20 minutes and a Q&A. So let's start back in the 70s. This is the visualization part of the talk. So I want you to think about looking at somebody that looked very similar to me, about 50 pounds lighter, long brown hair. Come on. Okay. Shoulder length brown hair. And you know, I was sitting there and I was in a world where there were only rotary phones. There's some people in the audience that have no idea what I'm talking about with that. You can ask your parents. But rotary phones where you stuck your finger in a little circle and you turned it until it clicked back the number of numbers. You turned it again, clicked back the number of numbers. There was no keypad. There was no cable. There was no internet. There were no computers. There were no answering machines. We had news twice a day for half an hour on the TV. The TV had 5 stations. 2 of them didn't work, and one of them, unfortunately, was with my beloved Big Bad Bruins at the time, Bobby Orr and everybody. And so what I used to do was wrap aluminum foil around a piece of metal coming out of the back of the TV, which is the antenna. I'd put one hand on the antenna, I'd put the other one out the window to get better reception, and I'd lean over to try and see the game. It probably explains my poor posture as well as my long arm span, but just the point is that things were very, very, very different. It's not they were better or worse, but the computing power that you carry around in this right now would have taken 4 rooms this size and a few dozen programmers just to write one piece of code, much less to be able to fuel a search engine. So it was different, but the idea of building skills was right there. And I want to take you through a couple of summer jobs I had. I think some of you are probably working, whether it's babysitting, waitressing, mowing the lawn, whatever it is. But some of the summer jobs I had gave me some basic skills. And again, I didn't understand it at the time, but you are building them constantly. So one summer, my parents gave me a one-way ticket on a bus to Colorado. I've thought about that many times why it was one way, but I was supposed to earn my way back. And I got out there, I stayed at a fire station for a couple of weeks, and I found a job at a dude ranch about 3.5 hours down into the mountains. I got another bus, went down there, and I got off, and immediately they shaved my head. All my hair was gone, as it is now. And I then ended up shoveling horse manure during the day and washing dishes at night. That lasted about 3 days, and I decided in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. I would sneak out of the bunkhouse and I would walk. I did walk 5 miles this time in the dark, in the woods, to the nearest bus station, and I caught the first bus to anywhere. I said to the driver, I have $4.75 in my pocket, and take me wherever that goes. And I didn't know where it was going, but I knew I didn't want to be there. I ended up in another part of Colorado, and I worked in a gas station and had a great summer. But the thing, I learned a few things in that dude ranch. I learned, first of all, I'm never going to own a horse. The output on a horse is unbelievable. Secondly, that I need to be wise in using dishes, because I didn't like doing that either, but it's led to more efficient cooking since I've gotten older. But seriously, the thing I really learned there, as a 16-year-old, it's important to start making your own decisions. It's important that you believe what you want to do. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's going to tell you what to do. In order for you to progress from where you are out into the world, you need to be confident in making your own decisions. It's okay to make mistakes. Making mistakes when you're younger is better because you've got a family structure around you. But make your own decisions. And so that's what I really took away from there, and I've built on that skill, as I'll show you, over the years. Second job I had, not second, but another job I had one summer was I got a job in the highway department of St. Louis. Now, St. Louis, for those of you who haven't been there in the summer, is about as oppressive as you can get. It's 95 degrees, 95% humidity. And I was walking behind a dump truck with 400-degree asphalt, shoveling it out, putting it in a pothole, tamping it down, putting a 50-pound tamper back up on the truck, walking the next one, 8 miles a day. And I would venture to say that when I walked in the first day, I was probably the only person that had aspirations to pursue a college degree. And I would say I was probably the only person without a felony on my record. But what I did learn was working with teams that have very different viewpoints. I learned about unions. I learned about working for difficult bosses. I mean, there are things I took away from that actually are things that you can then build on later in life. So the point of all of this, I had other jobs selling door-to-door out of my trunk of my 1964 Chevy that I bought for $50 back then, believe it or not, and some other jobs. All of them gave me pieces of basic sales skills, teamwork skills, business skills, planning skills, that all helped fuel what happened later in life in my career. So my point to the students out here is, although times were very different, the skills were very much the same. They're the same skills you'll get out of jobs that you have today. And so it's important to just get started, get some of the basics going, and start to think about what you're learning and build on it. So then I went off and I started getting the trilogy of college questions, which are ageless. You know, when you're looking at colleges, every adult will say, so where are you thinking of going to school? That's the first one. And so I got that one, and the second one, you come back after the first year, and you know, what are you going to major in? And that's the second one. And you'll end up asking these questions to your kids' friends later in life too. And then people ask you what you're going to do for work. Well, I got out of school and I was a history major. I had absolutely no plan. I was sitting there not having a clue what I was going to be doing. But I did realize that I did get a lot of skills out of college, and I think this is where there is a misconception that college doesn't prepare you. It does. College will give you critical thinking skills, research skills, some team skills, writing skills. You can take things out of there that you're going to be able to build in any career you choose and also in life that are really important. You've got to have those to succeed. If anyone had told me at that point that I would be a CEO of a mutual fund company running a $1.5 billion budget with $450 billion in assets and a few thousand employees, I would have laughed. I had no conception that that was where my life would have led, but it did. And so how did it get there from there? Well, I got out of school and I went back to Boston and I started to look for a job. And in those days, it was a newspaper. Every Sunday paper had a big stack of ads because, again, there were no search engines, no internet. And so I'd be flipping through, calling, trying to get an interview. And I finally got one at a little company called Fidelity. It was unknown at the time. And so I went and put on my $99 polyester suit from Anderson Little. Some people think that's funny because they'll remember it. It had a reversible vest, one side checked, one side plain. It was light blue, 2 pairs of matching pants, combed that long hair, put on the boots I shoveled horse manure with, and I walked downtown for my interview thinking, looking good. Well, needless to say, the interview didn't go great, but it went well enough with the human resources person I did that I got asked back for a second interview, which was great because I could use the other pants and reverse the vest. But I went down, had my interview, and I got the job. And I started at Fidelity answering the phones, customer service phones, very entry-level job, and paying $8,000 a year. We used to joke, and I just ran into an old friend of mine I haven't seen for 30 years who's here that he and I worked together. But we used to joke that it was a great place to work if your parents could afford to send you there. So it started out at a very, very low level. I spent about 8 years at Fidelity in jobs in the legal department, running sales groups, human resources, internal audit, a number of areas, running one of the sites here in Boston with a few hundred people, and progressed along. And then I was expecting our first child, sitting right there now, and I decided I really had to make a change and think more strategically about my career, and I decided to leave Fidelity. And I got a job at a place called Scudder, helping start up their marketing and sales organization. I stayed there about 9 years. We got purchased by Zurich Kemper. Zurich Kemper brought in their own management team, and I moved on and then started my first company for a group called Invest. We built a company from the ground up, and it was my first taste of being at the top of the leadership pyramid, which is very different than managing. And that's not what I'm going to talk about tonight, but I do have all sorts of ideas on that if anybody's interested in the Q&A side. I was there 7 years, and then Bank of America called, and when they purchased Fleet, they were also in the midst of what was called the market timing scandal, and they needed somebody to run the mutual fund business and consolidate it into a single $450 billion entity, and so I was tapped for that. And so the point of all of the career piece is all along the way, I was using some skills I started with and building skills to get better and better at what I did, in addition to having the knowledge. But I'll tell you one thing, when you get to be a CEO, it's not as important how much you know, and I know a lot of CEOs that I don't think know virtually anything, but I think it is very important that you know how to manage a team, you know how to get people to produce, you know how to get people to perform. And those are very different pieces, and there's a balance as you get higher up in the leadership chain that is fascinating, and I cover that in the later stages of my book. So let's talk about the generation of some of the younger folks sitting in the audience here. How's history going to look at you? Who's going to lead? There are people in this audience that will end up leading. They may have been the quiet people in high school, or it's not class rank oriented. So what are the characteristics that this group brings into the workforce that makes the need for skills so important? First of all, I think it's the first generation of truly global citizens. I mean, you guys grow up in a world where you have no boundaries. Technology gives you no boundaries. Travel gives you no boundaries. My daughters went overseas a number of times, and one even went around the world during her semester abroad. And you can go virtually anywhere that political systems will allow and find employment. Well, that's an interesting opportunity and also dilemma for some people. Secondly, you're a generation of instant. You have instant communication, you have instant news, you have instant results, you have instant access. That's new. That's not something that's been around for decades. That's the last decade or so that type of instant feedback is out there. Again, it creates things like lack of privacy, but it also gives you a real opportunity to try and figure out how to take that from here to something constructive in the future. You also are a generation that you really have the power of an individual. I mean, really think about this for a second. Countries have been overthrown because of an individual. Look at Egypt, started on Twitter and Facebook. You look at Occupy Wall Street, that was started by an individual. You look at nation states have been challenged by an individual. Think of the wars that we've been subject to the last few years. People don't say country, they say people's names. They say Osama bin Laden or Saddam Hussein started a war with the US, an individual. Now you start thinking about that in a career context, and you get Mark Zuckerberg and some other folks that also have been very powerful in terms of having an individual idea and being able to take it forward. You're growing up in a world that has computing power that it used to take years to build. Now Google or Amazon, if you want to be as big as a Fortune 500 company on the technology side, they'll sign you up. They'll let you just go ahead and use the cloud and use their computing power. So you can take your idea and you can make it very large very quickly. So those are all things that I think are interesting pieces, but the one I find the most interesting is I think this is a generation that has the potential to be the highest achieving generation that we've ever seen in this country. And here's why. There's an expectation that everybody gets straight A's. Good grief, I couldn't have come close to that. But there's an expectation you're good at every subject. There's an expectation you're going to be a good athlete. There's an expectation that you're going to be good at extracurricular and after-school pieces. And you've been going around doing all of these things simultaneously. I don't think it's a bad thing, but it certainly creates a generation that's very used to achieving at almost anything they do. Well, as this generation becomes adults, I think that presents a very fascinating possibility for what you can do as a generation, because you do have the ability to achieve at a higher level than other generations. So, third point, let's look at history today. So we've got a world that has some different themes and some different directions than we've seen before. There's a truly global workforce out there. You're entering a workforce where you're not competing with people in Medfield or even in Boston. You're competing with people around the world. You've got countries that are aspiring to get economic development and come out of a third world state into a middle class state. Even on our borders, Mexico's graduating more engineers per capita than any other country. Well, they're trying to take engineering jobs. So you're competing in a workforce that is truly global in nature. And when you couple that with what I would call knowledge commoditization, this idea that knowledge is becoming not less important, but it is less important relative to the skills you bring to the table, knowledge is no longer your advantage. And just one example of knowledge, the way knowledge is moving in terms of access is look what the NSA is doing. I did a consulting assignment up in Idaho where there were 200 different physicists that all they did all day was sit there and create algorithms to sort through emails, texts, phone calls, word search, and extract information that they thought was potentially dangerous to the US. Okay, that's good on the one hand because it's protecting us, but think about the power that has to extract knowledge and take knowledge and use it in much different forms than we're ever used to. That type of knowledge commoditization puts everyone on equal footing because you can actually use your computers now and acquire an awful lot of knowledge very quickly. So what has to happen now, it's not what you know, it's how fast you can learn. You have to learn as fast or faster than the people around you to keep up with a knowledge set, then overlay a skill set that gives you the competitive advantage. So when you couple a global workforce, this instant access and technology, and knowledge commoditization with a generation that has the power of the individual, is a high achieving generation, and is used to very instant results, I think you get a potential that is really staggering to me and exciting when you start to think about it. This is going to be a world of a lot of change for this group, and they're going to be driving it. But I also see great opportunities out there. I mean, think about the instant delivery. We're used to going from the mail system to UPS and FedEx to overnight delivery. Now Amazon's talking about having drones drop from local shipping areas within 15 minutes of your ordering it at your door. Well, there are other ways to do instant delivery. 3D printing is coming around. And I was just reading that Hershey's signed a deal with one of the 3D printing companies that They want to make it so you can design and print your own chocolate in your house. Well, that's interesting. I mean, you don't have to go to a store anymore. I guess if you have the right ingredients, it'll be fine, but that's the type of thinking that's going on. And you could even take that a step further. I mean, I ran into the gentleman who started Beanie Babies, and he made $6 billion doing Beanie Babies. Well, think about who's going to design templates for toys, a pricing mechanism, and the ability to print right in your house. When you want a new toy, you just go print it. You don't have to go anywhere. In a 3D printer. And you know, I've said this to a couple people and they go, but the cost is going to be prohibitive. Well, the cost is prohibitive right now, but when I went to school, a graphing calculator was $3,000. Now it's an app on your iPhone. I mean, the pricing piece is going to change, and it's going to become a very accepted technology, and I think there's so much opportunity there, and somebody's going to come up with ideas on how to leverage it. The other one I think about is the whole credit card and payment system. I don't think credit cards will be here 5 years from now or 10 years from now. It's all going to be, whether it's retinal scans or fingerprints or other ways of delivering payment authenticity, there will be other ways to replace that. So that's a huge field and one that has great opportunity. So as people ask me, you know, well, how am I going to find a job when I come out of college? I tell them to look for trends first and companies second. You know, there's some incredibly large trends happening, whether it's healthcare, whether it's energy, global trade, aging, water scarcity, travel, e-commerce. Those are the big themes that are happening. You start to look for companies underneath that so that you can have a career that can hopefully have some longevity in one of these larger themes. I've always used the example of, you know, look at drugstores, the progression of drugstores. It was a mom and pop operation. I used to walk down and get them. It was replaced by CVS because CVS could get pricing power and access to a wider variety of goods. Walmart came along and pushed CVS into a pricing power problem because they offered a wider array of product. And then now you've got, if I want, you know, some toothpaste and some other things, and I know by 2 o'clock today I order it online, it shows up on my doorstep from drugstore.com. So that's a progression that you saw a whole industry change. But not everybody in that industry was a pharmacist. Very few people were probably. They needed HR, tech, project management people, salespeople. So there are a lot of job opportunities in fields that may seem technical, but they really have a lot of opportunity for anybody who comes in with a set of skills that they can use and apply. So with that, I want to just move on to the skills themselves. So what all of this means is that you're going out into a world that has great change and rapid change. It's true for students, it's true for parents, it's true for grandparents. We're all going to be dealing with change and a lot of it. And somebody going to the workforce today, the stats that are coming out is you're going to have 6 to 8 different job changes or career changes. Well, what do you take with you when you do that? You can take skills. They are transferable. They don't have an expiration date. You can bring them from one place to another. And as I said earlier, you know, what you learn now, you're going to be using 30 or 40 years from now. It is something you can take through all those job progressions. So my way of looking at it that I outline in the book is you're building tools in a toolbox. The more tools you have, the more you're going to be able to adapt to that change and work with that change and not have it be as uncomfortable. And for people coming out of college right now, there are some brochures I left up on the table up there, but there are some basic skills that you can start working on today. And the thing about skills is there is a defined process for learning it. Think about when you first started playing sports or an instrument. You had no idea what you were doing. That's called being unconsciously incompetent. You didn't know what it was. And then it became, once you got good at it, it became second nature. It was unconsciously competent. Well, as you go through that progression, you go from not knowing what you don't know to all of a sudden becoming aware of what you don't know. So that's consciously incompetent. And you start to think about what you can do. You start to practice it and learn it. Then you become consciously competent, and then you become unconsciously competent when it becomes second nature. That process is very repeatable. It's very repeatable when you think about it. And so as you start to look at skills that you can build, you can use that process to get better and better at what you do. Now, I'll just touch on a few before I open it up for questions. First one is a resume. A resume, most people think, is to get a job. It's not. A resume is to get an interview. You have to write very differently. You don't want a term paper as a resume. It doesn't need to be everything you've done. As an interviewer, and I've looked at literally thousands of resumes and done thousands of interviews, give me something that makes me want to talk to you. Be brief, be succinct, show me success, show me commitment. Those are the things the resume needs to bring across. It doesn't need to bring across every point that you think is important about your life. You want somebody to look at that resume and go, I want to talk to that person. That's it. Then the resume is off to the side. And that brings you to interviewing. There are realities about interviewing that, again, as somebody who's interviewed a lot of people, I've shared in the book, but appearance matters. Come in, be polite, shake my hand, look me in the eye. You know, it sounds like basic stuff, but I'll tell you, half the people miss it. Then be prepared, know what you want to talk about, have done some research on the company or the organization that you're looking at, and be ready to ask some questions. And you don't have to be ready to ask 10 questions. Come in with 2 or 3 good ones. I put a few in there. They're some of my favorites. How do you, how do you define success for this particular job? That's a great question for an interviewer because it gives you a chance to say, okay, this is what they're looking for. Well, guess what? My skills match that, or my experience matches that. And then you get into some other ones that are kind of interesting. Peer relations. Anybody who's been a teenager, which we all have, they're still living, knows that peer relations are very difficult. The great thing about becoming an adult is you get to choose who your peers are, rather than have to show up and sit next to them in class. But peer relations, there are skills you can use to become better at that, because that's one of the hardest dynamics as you get out into the adult world to deal with. Managing up or managing people downward is fairly straightforward. Managing sideways with peers can be a challenge. So that's a skill you can get better at. Collaboration, another one. And personality types. I had a great story from back in the late 80s. When I made my move to Scudder, I ended up sitting next to a guy who we did not get along at all. Absolutely oil and water. So we worked on it for a little bit, and we actually went to a training class together and learned about personality styles. He was a very strong introvert. As you can tell, I'm not. And so we had a disconnect. But as soon as we learned that there are ways that you can work together, our relationship got pretty good. And now he's personally one of my best friends. I haven't worked with him in 20 years, but he's one of the best friends I've got. And it was all because we learned that, working with different personality styles, there are ways that you can get better at that are useful. And then one of my pet peeves in life in general is active listening. That's a skill that everybody can get much better at. And active listening is very different than waiting to speak. When you watch a lot of conversations, you'll see people sitting there just not really listening, going, but this is my idea. Okay, stop for a second. Tell me what my idea was, and then let's have a conversation about yours. But slow down and actually listen to what somebody's saying. It's an incredibly powerful skill, not just for being an employee or being a manager. It's a great skill for being a spouse, for being in a relationship. These are all things that can help you in a wide variety, and that's why I call them skills for life. And the last one is managing up, learning how to manage up to a boss. There are things you can do to make a boss more successful. If the boss is more successful and you've helped him, guess what? You're going to be more successful as well. These are all skills that you can start working on right now as you're going into college, coming out of college, even going into high school. You can start to work on some of these, and they will reap benefits for you. So that's just a small sample of the things that hopefully you can take away as you read the book, and I'm happy to expand on them more. There are a lot of management and leadership skills in there that some of the parents actually might like because they are from deeper in my career, and I just didn't want to write 3 books, so I put them all into one. But the bottom line is that skills are your advantage, and this generation has more ability than they know they do. They'll learn that, and they can affect change, and people can affect change on their own. They don't have to be, again, the top student, top anything. If you want to affect change with skills, you can do it. And I believe very strongly in what this generation has to offer. I'd be fascinated to see how it unfolds. And before I take questions, I just want to say one more thing about Needham Bank. I've been a customer there for a little bit, and I think it's great to have not just a local business, but a local business that's involved in community these days. And obviously my career spanned a number of institutions, but when I read in the paper that some larger banks are having a problem adding, that concerns me, and it causes a lack of trust, I think, amongst a lot of people. When you look at Needham Bank, they're a very solid local bank. They care about being in the community. They've been doing things like waiving ATM fees or reimbursing ATM fees. You know, a great place to put an account if you're going off to college. You don't have to worry about opening an account out there. They'll be able to take it for you. So I'm proud to be associated with you, and thank you for the opportunity to get up and talk. So with that, I'm going to open it for questions. You're welcome to ask me about anything I talked about, anything I didn't talk about, but I'm happy to answer whatever you've got in your minds. I'd offer a couple of things. One is preparation as you go into a job is key. I think you've got to go in and be more prepared than most people. That's going to put you in the top quartile anyway of the people that are interviewing. But the questions you ask in that interview, I think you need to be more leading in your questions and ask questions that you can then reinforce with your background, your interests, your commitment. And then don't be afraid to highlight the things that you've done well. I think that most people don't necessarily speak up and say, I'm really good at this, or I did this well. You can do that without being arrogant or cocky. You can just highlight it. So you do need to step up and say, what you have done. I think that the whole achievement at every level is a challenge, and you see it manifesting itself in so many ways. Because everybody's shooting for that straight A. I mean, kids apply to 10 to 15 schools now, and you get waitlisted when they're saying you're perfectly qualified, but we've got so many applicants, we don't know what to do. We got to see who our yield is first before you're accepted. I mean, it's manifesting itself in a way where people are shooting out a wide range of resumes. I think being targeted in what you are trying to achieve and being focused, and don't walk into an interview and say, oh, I just need a job. Walk into an interview and say, I want this job, and here's why. Even if you say that 3 times during a day with 3 different companies, make that commitment, because you need that edge to secure the job. But landing a first job, both of my daughters have done it in the last number of years, and I know my oldest could give a better talk than I could on this, but she put out over 600 resumes before she got a response. The other piece of it is patience and persistence. We had a number of conversations, and I'm not violating a father-daughter confidentiality here, but we had a number of conversations saying, just keep going. I know it's frustrating, but because that's what you need, is to be encouraging, especially as parents. Be encouraging, don't be discouraging. I've had a number of people come to talks and, my son doesn't do this or my daughter doesn't do that, and I'm like, try being positive. It'll really help, because it's hard enough being out there, as somebody coming out of school. It's tough enough, and having people who are your advocates is very helpful. So I offer that as just a parental suggestion. I came out, and I've always been kind of a hard charger, and I'm like really excited, and can't we just decide this now, and give me a decision now, and I'm kind of instant do it in one of my first jobs at Fidelity in the career. I mean, you got one chance to touch something, you're off and running. For somebody who's an extrovert and talks out loud and thinks that's great, that works really well. But a lot of people don't operate that way. They want to actually sit and think about it, which I think is extremely valuable, I might add. But you need to understand that if somebody is uncomfortable having a dialogue and solving it now, they probably want to go away and think about it and come back and talk to you. It can be as simple as, I'm thinking about this issue. Can we talk about it tomorrow morning? Because I've got some ideas, but I really want to get yours. All of a sudden, the comfort level of the person who doesn't want to have that immediate dialogue goes way down, and they say, yeah, that'd be great. So the way we identified styles was, there are a lot of different tools. I mean, we did the Myers-Briggs thing and realized that we were, I was strong extrovert, he was a strong introvert. And then there are actually strategies when you start matching those up and say, okay, you need to do this and you need to do that. And what I need to do was slow down, be more respectful of the idea that somebody needed time to think about it. And also taking time to think about my position a little more. And he needed to understand that I just like to get things done. And that's actually a good trait too, but he needs to say, hang on a second, let's back up. So communication is good. Feedback is another piece that's very important. You want to try and build, even where you disagree, you can disagree without being disagreeable. And if you're feeling uncomfortable with somebody's style, just say, hey, can we back up a second, because I'm really not quite with you there. It's tough because a lot of time tone of voice comes in and other things, But those types of strategies do work if somebody can facilitate it to get the energy level, if there's kind of a historical issue, get the energy level on the distrust down and start to facilitate, okay, you like to hear things this way, you like to hear things this way, let's just tackle this today and tackle that in another meeting. So I think being very clear on expectations and encouraging feedback is good. If you're really stuck and people are really stuck, sit them down in a room and say, all right, here we go. You get 5 minutes to talk, then you be quiet. You get 5 minutes to talk, and you be quiet. And I actually take yellow stickies or a whiteboard and write up the issues and start to look at where gaps are. As soon as people see it visually, they tend to settle down. So there are visual tools you can use to try and break a really stuck situation. And the one thing I'd say in that is make sure you're managing to facts and not trying to settle advocacy arguments. Get the facts out and everybody talk about the facts. If you're trying to help people stop yelling at each other because they just don't like each other, everybody needs to go away for a minute and come back. So, but it's a great question. It's a tough issue, and it's one that makes teamwork a lot better if you can be a good facilitator and have people understand the rules that they're working with. Interesting thing about mentoring that you need to remember is mentors are not people that come up to you and say, hey, I want to mentor you. A mentor is somebody who you approach and you say, I'd really like help with this, and I really like what you're saying about this. Could you help me with these types of things, or could you give me feedback on that? You ask, and as soon as you do that, a good mentor, somebody who's interested in doing that, will say, sure, let's work together on what it is you're trying to get better at, and let me give you some feedback. So mentoring, I think that's the biggest misconception, is that mentoring happens because you're waiting around for somebody to come up and kind of anoint you as their mentee. It's actually exactly the opposite. The other piece on mentoring that I think is critically important, and it stems out of the whole active listening piece, is a mentoring relationship, and I've had literally hundreds of them, is not about me telling them what I want. It's about me trying to understand what's important to them and what they're struggling with, and be helpful. A couple things are important. One is confidentiality, and the other one is what I would call, it's a skill that I outline in there called situational leadership. And I'm a big disciple of situational leadership, and what it means is that as a leader, you need to adapt to the person, the situation. It's not about, just driving home a point. So let me give you an illustration that would show it a little better. If I have a great general counsel, a lawyer that works for me in a company, I can ask him to cut a contract with a vendor, and he can go off and do that in a matter of minutes. I don't really need to say much more than that. But if I say to him, I need a complete redesign of the trading system and the whole IM interface, and he'd look at me and go, what are you talking about? And instead I'd say, I need you to do these 4 things. So with him on that, I'd be very directive and say, here are the things I need you to accomplish. He can write them down and go off and check them off. On the other side with a contract, I don't need to give him a list. I'm delegating to him. So those are the 2 ends of the spectrum. You also have a coaching and participating side of it as well. So when you're mentoring, it's very important that you listen to what somebody's actually trying to solve. You make them define it, and then you work towards their goals, not try and impose yours. I personally have found mentoring relationships extremely valuable, and there's nothing better as a leader, and I've had over 8,000 people work for me in this city. There's nothing better than seeing people pop up as president here, COO there, people who've really gone on to accomplish. And some of the people I've fired, unfortunately, but they've learned a lot, and they've learned some things to do better. And it's great to see that, and that's the reward you get from mentoring, is seeing people really achieve. And for me anyway, that's the best part of business, or best part of a career. Now, social media is the phenomenon of kind of this instant society that this generation is growing up in. 2 things. One, lack of privacy. And the second is there are people that kind of put out an image that isn't necessarily reality. So fighting through what's real in social media, I think, is one of the challenges. I think social media is here to stay. I think that it will probably change. I'm not sure that the social media avenues that are out there now are the ones that are going to persist. In terms of LinkedIn, I use that for building, the repertoire of everybody I've worked with. I don't necessarily want to talk to them all the time, but I want to know where they are, what they're doing. If I start up another company, I want to be able to, pull on resources that I've got. So that's a great one from just a contact standpoint. In terms of Facebook and Twitter, in my own household, we've got, different not viewpoints, but different usages of that. My lovely wife doesn't have any interest in Facebook and isn't on it. I'm on it because I want to stay connected with my kids, but I have actually shrunk the field way down because I don't want to take everybody I've ever known with me on every place and hear what they're eating for dinner or something. It's not that interesting to me. So I think social media is going to play a role in that it fuels instant communication. Reputations of companies, careers, people can be made and lost in it very quickly. What I would say with social media is use it strategically and start to think about what you're using it for, rather than just throw things out there. A favorite phrase that I've used is never put anything on an email or text or social media that you don't want on the front page of the New York Times or the Boston Globe, because that's where it could end up. And you've got to realize that that's what the power of this medium is, and use it appropriately. And I've seen more and more use of companies using it in background checks, going in and finding out what you've got up in social media and where you are. And so it's hard to fathom as you're coming out of high school and college, because there are a lot of skills you put up on social media that aren't necessarily usable in business. How good you are at beer pong or something, but be judicious about what you have there, because it is becoming more and more part of your overall fabric and reputation as you go out into the workplace. I think the pitfalls or the challenges in this generation is the speed of change. Change is so rapid, and social media fuels it. You see companies come and go overnight, very large companies. BlackBerry is a great example. BlackBerry had a dominant share. 2 years later, they're almost gone. I mean, the rapidity of change and how quickly it changes is the challenge that this generation has, because they've got to be able to adapt to that. And that's why I really believe you can take your skills with you to different careers, and you're going to need them, because if you make a wrong choice on where you and the career choice you have, you're going to need to change direction pretty quickly. And that can be a pretty uncomfortable place. I mean, dealing with change is hard, and no matter what you're doing, people like kind of more structure and regularity. But when you're dealing with really rapid change, that's, I think, the biggest challenge I'd see for this generation, is they've got to be nimble and on their feet. But guess what? They do it every day. I mean, the things they manage every day and how quickly their world changes, second nature to them. To me, it's like, wow, how do you manage that much that quickly? So I think, beyond change, it's going to be trying to identify a career that has longevity for you. One of the blessings and curses of technology is it makes you more efficient. It also is taking out a lot of entry-level jobs that are used as feeders into a career. That's the hardest piece, I think, for somebody entering the workforce, is there are fewer entry-level jobs because they can be done by technology. Again, my friend here that was here back in 1987, pre-internet, which I did not invent, by the way, and touch-tone phone and the VRUs, we took 600,000 calls in one day at Fidelity. It was 3 times what we normally took. We need a lot of people to do that. These days, I don't know what the volumes are, but they're in the single-digit thousands. They're not in the 200,000 range. So a whole series of jobs have been stripped out just by that. So identifying a field that has opportunity and has growth where you can get in an entry level is one of the challenges, and I think it's going to fuel this whole idea of the power of an individual. I think that there's also a great opportunity for the kids coming out to do something on their own. They have access to resources we never even dreamed of. If you've got a good idea, you can go get it. And so I think there'll be more people kind of starting up and taking that risk when they're single and when they don't have other obligations that may be the counterbalance to that. Thank you very much for your time. Look forward to seeing you outside, and Appreciate it. Have a great evening.
I'm Roberta Lynch, and you're watching Medfield.tv.
Production support provided by Medfield.tv. Access to our community.